So it's a great pleasure, a really great pleasure for me to introduce this evening Dr. Antonia Thomas from UHI. She's going to talk to us about the art and architecture at the Ness of Brodgar. And this, of course, is one of her specialist subjects. She has many, many specialisms, and she's a very, very strong scholar and a wonderful communicator. So it really is great to have you here, Antonia. I said I would give the brief biography we have. It's not so brief, but I also think it's important that you know who's standing in front of you rather than just assuming that, she's got a CV of 2 lines long, because she doesn't. She has a very long CV, a very impressive one. So she's an associate professor of art and archaeology at UHI, and she's based within the Archaeology Institute at UHI Orkney. A PhD undertaken at Aberdeen in 2016 was entitled Art and Architecture in Neolithic Orkney, Process, Temporality and Context. It involved a detailed study of the decorated stonework from Maes Howe, Skara Brae, and particularly the Ness of Brodgar, where she's been part of the excavation and post-excavation team since 2006. Antonia was a member of the advisory panel for Scotland's rock art project, SCRAP. That's the acronym there. It's a very strange one. SCRAP. And has been commissioned by Historic Environment Scotland to undertake specialist architectural survey work at tombs in Orkney, including the home of Papa Westray South, where she identified previously unknown carvings and rediscovered some which had been thought to have been lost or long destroyed. Her interest in art and archaeology ranges from the Neolithic to the present day, and in 2020 she launched a unique interdisciplinary master's programme in contemporary art and archaeology at UHI, which continues to attract students from across the UK, Europe and North America. So you can see why I persevered with that biography. Yes, thank you very much, Antonia. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you. Thanks, Carl. Thank you. I'm in danger of blushing with all this, actually, but thank you very much. I hope I live up to that wonderful introduction. So thank you. But thank you for coming tonight. And it's great to see so many friendly and familiar faces here. And also so many people who have also been part of the Ness of Brodgar for a very long time as well. And lots of people who know a lot more about the site than I do. So thank you very much for coming along and listening to a lot of this. Because the Ness of Brodgar is such a well-known site and because so many people know so much about it, what I hope to do tonight is offer a bit of a personal reflection on my involvement in the site over the last few years, how I came to be interested in the decorated stones in the first place, and a little bit about my journey with them, and some of the kind of ideas around them that have preoccupied me over the last too many years, and some of the kind of challenges and opportunities that arise from studying this truly remarkable and world-class, unique assemblage. So I'll hope to talk a little bit about that tonight and some of the ideas for the next stage as well as we enter this crucial kind of post-excavation stage that we're in with the site. So just checking I'm not standing in front of the screen, that's okay. So first of all, if you'll indulge me, I want you to take a little trip back in time with me, not to the Neolithic just yet, but actually to 2006. And where I just started on the Ness of Brodgar site. Now, of course, this wasn't the start of the excavations. The start of the excavations really, or the interest in the modern excavations on the site was in 2003 when Arnie ploughed up the stone in the field and lots of exciting things happened. Guard kind of revealed the building and all of these things that you know. So, but my involvement with the site started in 2006. So cast your mind back 20 years ago. Tony Blair was still Prime Minister. The Queen had just celebrated her 80th birthday. Germany was hosting the World Cup. And I was having the most iconic archaeological summer imaginable. Just a few weeks before I worked on site here at the Ness, I was lucky enough to find the Neolithic settlement at the Brazer Harbreck in Wyre. And then Nick asked me if I would be interested in digging a site in Stennis. that they were assembling a small team for. And so ended up working in Trench J. And this is what it looked like then. And if you can, very recognisable now for those, and look, I've got a little pointer. That was the sondage that I was involved in, digging. And I remember Nick making me dig down more and more just to prove it was natural. So the reason I've got this slide up is because this is where the first decorated stone from the Ness of Brodgar really came up. And here it is. And in 2006, these two fragments, and see they were found in two fragments, different small fine numbers, turned up in Trench J. And just looking here, you can see the kind of typical kind of what we would maybe call cross and lozenge kind of decoration, these kind of, kind of row of saltires, if you like, on this. And we would have to wait until the following year, 2007, oops, oh, here we go, to see the rest of it. And the other bit kind of turned up, or at least some of the, we can imagine that there was a much bigger overall piece, and these bits have been lost. Now, it's something really exciting in archaeology when you get kind of bits that fit together. It's one of those things that we all really love. But particularly when they're in separate years as well, that's always particularly exciting, happens. And you can see, it's maybe not much to speak of when we kind of think about all the fantastic stones we have from the Ness now. But this kind of fragments here are really, really important. Now, 2006, 2007, if you'd have asked me back then to give a talk to Orkney Archaeology Society about Orkney's rock art or passage grave art, it would have been a very short talk indeed, because before the Ness of Brodgar, there were really only a handful or so known examples of what we might call Neolithic art from Orkney altogether, or that had really been characterised in that way. And really, if you think about how amazing Orkney's Neolithic is, it seems incredible that 20 years ago, that thinking about decoration, thinking about rock art wasn't really part of that conversation. It was all about the monuments, it was all about the kind of big sites and things like that. And that was because we simply did not have the same material that we have now, thanks to the Ness of Brodgar. Now, of course, this wasn't the first stone that came from the site. It was the first stone that came from the site during the modern kind of phase of excavations, if you like. But of course, the first stone that came from the site was this one, the incredible Brodgar stone that everyone knows. Here it is in its, as it was photographed by Peter Leith Sr. in 1925. And he helpfully chalked in the edge of the stone just so we can all see those wonderful bands of incised lines. 8 bands, each with a different pattern, zigzags, chevrons, cross and lozenge designs again, and these sort of designs that now we feel very familiar with as kind of really representing this kind of typical style that we see at Brodgar. Now, when it was found, it wasn't really thought to have been part of a Neolithic site. The kind of orthostatic arrangement of upright slabs, and also the decoration itself, which is in many ways quite similar to what you'd see on beaker pottery, actually kind of suggested a Bronze Age rather than Neolithic date. And actually, until kind of I think it was in, we would correct me, Nick, but was it in 2008 actually found in structure 8 the actual location where this had come from, and then it became clear that it had actually come from one of the monumental structures on site at the Ness of Brodgar. But the reason it wasn't really thought to have been Neolithic art as such, there was no real parallel for that at this time when it was found. And certainly in terms of thinking about Neolithic art, what people tended to think of, and still do to a certain extent, is the kind of big passage grave art that we see in very few sites actually in Orkney. It's very much not the usual. Sites like Peerwall was discovered during quarrying in 1981 in Westray, and now thankfully back home in Westray, this wonderful stone that you can see here. Oh, excuse me. And this is very much in the style of Europe's biggest and most dramatic assemblage of passage grave art at Newgrange and the Boyne Valley sites in the east of Ireland. And because they have dominated the literature for so long, this is what people expect to see with passage graves and with Neolithic buildings. It was thought that Orkney really didn't have anything in comparison apart from these odd sites. And of course, the pier wall stone wasn't found until 1981. So before that, there was just a few stones from AD and other sites as well. And just to, in addition to that, Orkney's most fabulous, finest piece of Neolithic architecture at Maze How doesn't have any of these sort of stones either. Because if there's anywhere in Orkney you'd expect to see a big hex spiral huge stone or something like that, it would certainly be Maze How. But it doesn't have that. In Orkney, people speak a little bit quieter, a little softer, perhaps, and the expression is suitably subtle and restrained as well, but no less wonderful for it. So in Maze How, there are actually loads of carvings, loads of Neolithic inscriptions. The one shown here, this one, illustrated in the 1860s, but dismissed as a kind of sketch or a doodle, but certainly thought to have been Norse along with the other ones, was only in the 1980s identified as a Neolithic carving by Patrick Ashmore of Historic Scotland, as it was then. And that's this one here. And you can see that classic kind of banded decoration, the crosses, the lozenge kind of shapes we've come to really kind of expect almost from this style of artwork. In the 1990s and early 2000s, a team with Richard Bradley and Colin Richards did a lot of survey work across quite a number of Maze How type tombs in Orkney and identified a range of kind of carvings, lightly incised carvings throughout many of them. And they identified this one in Maze How that had not been seen before. And when I came to do my survey work for my PhD, I found quite a few other ones in Maze How as well, including the other ones shown on this slide. So they're certainly there. And you can see that this kind of banded decoration, this kind of style is very similar to what we see on the Brodgar stone and very similar to what we see in other stones at the Ness as well. Okay. But one of the reasons that Orkney's rock art maybe wasn't in the public consciousness until perhaps with the Ness of Brodgar was until then, the largest assemblage of Neolithic rock art in Orkney actually didn't come from a burial site at all, didn't come from a passage grave, didn't come from anything associated typically with funerary activity, came from Scarrett Bray. And of course, we're so unbelievably lucky in Orkney because we are the only place in Northwest Europe where we have stone-built burial sites and houses from the same time surviving. I mean, it's just extraordinary. We take it for granted a little bit, I think, and sometimes you have to stop and just think, wow, actually, this is pretty extraordinary what we have here. And nowhere else has houses like this from that time. So nowhere else has the decoration in the houses from that time. So all those assumptions that art was just something to do with passage graves and funerary sites was predicated on a lack of evidence for something that simply did not exist in other areas. Anyway, I'm here not to talk about Scarrett Bray, but Ness of Brodgar. So back to the Ness. And back to Trench P in particular, moving away from Trench J where I started and moving on to Trench P. And this photo, I was trying to work it out from the State of Excavation Structure 14 and things. I think it's maybe 2016, something like that. Anyway, I was trying to figure it out and I wasn't quite sure. But Trench P was opened in 2007 and then extended in 2008, which then took in structure 10. And it's structure 10 where I really started to get excited about Orkney's rock art and what was happening at the Ness of Brodgar. I was lucky enough to be a supervisor on site, supervising structure 10. And this is me in 2009 drawing this mass of rubble, which is actually just, you can see how, I'm sure you all know how deep the trenches got at the end. So this is when it's all still very high up. And I often use this picture with my art and archaeology students to think about drawing and the process of drawing and how it allows you to see things in archaeology. Because as any of us here know, if you've been doing field work, sometimes looking at the mass of rubble, it's very hard to make sense of things. But once you slow down and start to look in a way that requires that engagement between hand, eye, and brain that drawing does, you suddenly start to see things, and it suddenly shifts into focus like a magic eye picture, and suddenly you see things. And for me, in this rubble, which isn't just rubble, it's the uppermost levels of the very deliberate rubble filling structure 10 at the end of its life, started to notice that there are a lot of decorated stones that had been placed in that rubble, including some rather special ones. And here's a very much younger, slimmer version of me with one of the best stones on the site, which came to be known as the Brodgar Eye. And this was one of those stones because that turned up face down in that rubble layer. And the pecking on that stone seemed to me, at least, excavating it, that it was very fresh. It was almost like it had been pecked to be placed in it, which perhaps speaks to the special deposition of that rubble, but certainly triggered something in my brain and made me want to study it. And so that was what led to me studying my PhD. And this was a picture that Fian MacArthur took for Radio Orkney a long time ago when we were talking about that. So, again, sorry, indulging me. 10 years ago, I finished that body of work, and that was published as this book. Now, 10 years is a long time, and there's certainly a lot I would change now. And certainly there's been a huge amount of discoveries and wonderful new evidence and data and all sorts of things that mean that I would probably change a lot of the interpretations, perhaps around things to do dating and phasing and things like that. But I'm still quite proud of it as a piece of work. So, where are we now? Moving on to the kind of state of play with the Ness of Brodgar as it is now in the decorated stones. The assemblage, so many stones, and around 1100, something like that. Say around 1100. I've not catalogued them all fully, and there will probably be some which will be discarded. Then there'll probably be ones that come in as well as they get found during in environmental samples or recatalogued from different categories of finds or all these sorts of things. It's huge. The biggest assemblage of architectural rock art from the Neolithic anywhere in Northwest Europe. And it's everywhere on the site. And it really is everywhere. It's found in every context, every type of context, in every type of structure at the Ness of Brodgar. Still in situ in walls, in floor deposits, everywhere. And in terms of the type of marks and type of artwork we've got on the site, or types of stone working and attention, a whole suite of different types of processes of stoneworking. Got pick dressing, pecking, chiseling, cut marking, grinding, drilling, incising, carving, polishing, painting, etc., etc. Just everything you might think of. Now, There's also other kind of interesting kind of categories of stone as well, which I'll kind of touch upon later. There's also stones with natural markings and some with worked stones that are also have decoration that also perhaps fall into this kind of category. And just to have some pretty pictures up of kind of shows some of the range of the assemblage. Um, some of the stones are massive, really, really huge. This is a 30 centimetre scale. So you can see that the stone itself is getting up to about 40 centimetres, really huge, from structure 10, from one of the corners inside the building. And it's such an amazing design. There's no wonder it was chosen for the bags and the t-shirts and the rest of it, and it really lends itself to it. These kind of triangles, each one of them filled with a slightly different pattern, in the same way that the bands on the Brodgar stone are all different. So it's kind of quite lovely in that way. So really huge pieces and some really small pieces. This is just look at that scale, that's 2 centimetres. It's absolutely tiny. And this is something that came up, Cecily, who does our environmental samples, is incredible. She can spot the tiniest things. She's so skilled at picking this material up. And just look at the kind of size of that and the patterning on it. So really quite amazing. So there's some big pieces and some small pieces. There are some really interesting designs which really get your head kind of going and thinking, well, what does it mean? Is it a kind of something to do with counting? Is it, you can really kind of run wild with your imagination. These have all been drilled, these little holes. They're all around 1 centimetre in diameter and they've been drilled. Quite easy to do. And some bigger sort of cut marks as well. This, of course, is from one of the piers in structure 12 or the building under it. I'm not quite sure. Sadly, this is one of the ones that we had to leave on site because quite simply in 2024, it was not possible to demolish the entire site to get every single stone out. So many of these stones have been recorded, a preservation by record, if you like, rather than in reality. And other cut mark stones, this really intriguing one that was in the entranceway to structure 10 with kind of something like about 35 cups ground into it of different sizes. It's a different number every time you count them, honestly. There's something kind of strange going on with this stone. And it's really quite an unusual stone for the site as well. And so lots of different forms of stoneworking. The middle one on the top there is chiselled. These are all kind of, and then the top right one is and both the stones on the right are bas relief, pick dressing, where certain areas have been left proud of the rest of the stone to kind of create a kind of a relief effect. And very, very kind of sophisticated stoneworking techniques. And in terms of a British context, you only really see this at pretty much one other site, Barclodius Igauris. Apologies to any Welsh speakers here for my mangling of that, the passage grave in Anglesey. So how can we start to kind of unpick all of this kind of huge assemblage, lots of different types of stones, lots of different, found everywhere, etc.? Well, what we have at the Ness of Brodgar is context. And context is really, of course, the archaeologist's best friend, because this is what gives us the upper hand in really trying to find out what is going on. We're able to unpick the stratigraphy and the chronology of individual stones and think about when they were placed and when they were appreciated during site. So thinking about where stones are placed and key questions of that. And some of the contexts are really interesting. This stone, for example, is actually made up of several pieces of stone, all put in a kind of clothing deposit in the entranceway of the annex of structure 12 at the end of that particular structure's life. And so And this is, you know, that kind of really iconic kind of symbol of the Brodgar butterfly there, which is almost kind of, I don't know, unsettling in its kind of strikingness, I think. But across the site, we find concentrations in similar places to where we might do with passage graves as well, with entrances being particular focus for decoration. This is the entranceway to structure 1. And you see, it's absolutely covered in different types of markings, from kind of lightly incised patterns to the kind of rosette pattern shown on that stone on the bottom right there. And this is something we see again and again in all sorts of Neolithic buildings, is that entranceways form a particular focus of attention. And not just Neolithic buildings as well. You go to almost any building of any period, you will find graffiti or marks or protection marks or something around entrances. Okay. So, and what these sort of contexts tell us, certainly, is that a lot of these stones were made for display. And this is the dresser in structure 10. Absolutely mind-blowing piece of kind of furniture, or whatever you want to call it, structural feature. Would have been absolutely beautiful in its day, and became a beautiful ruin when we were excavating it. The central red sandstone pillar been pick dressed all over, and that would have hit the light as you entered through structure 10 and would have almost glowed. Can you imagine what that was like? And the stone on the right, big pick dressed yellow sandstone here as well, with bas relief carving on it as well. It would have been a really beautiful structure. And we know that the Neolithic stone carvers were very skilled in not only selecting these materials, but also in working them to bring out the best of their qualities. So with the red and yellow sandstones, for example, pick dressing them really brings to life the colour within them. And actually talking about bringing them to life might well have been part of that process of carving them. So we can think about colour. And having colour at the Ness of Brodgar, again, another mind-blowingly unique thing that the Ness has. Painted stones, pigments. Wow, you know. Of course, the picture on the right there isn't from the Ness. That's a stone pot from Skara Brae. It's in Stromness Museum, and it's one of the many finds from Skara Brae that was when the stone pots that had pigment inside them when they were found. So we'd always known that it was a possibility that people were using pigment in this way, but only at the Ness of Brodgar did it appear on the walls and also on the pots as well. Okay, so these things were obviously meant to be seen and designed for maximum visual impact. But at other parts of the site, the visibility was not perhaps the main concern. And in fact, there's a bit of a paradox with some of the stones on the site, is that the ones that are in the most visible positions and the ones which seem to have had the most intense carving and attention on them, such as these ones, the pictures on the right-hand side here, I've digitized the lines in to show the intensity of carving on them. They're actually almost invisible unless you have the light just right. So there's a kind of paradox of where the most attention on the stone doesn't necessarily equate to it being the most visible. And I find this quite interesting because I think it shows you, it kind of challenges what we think of as art being meant to be seen, and maybe there's something else going on there. And this became most clear of all when we were excavating structure 7. Structure 7 and structure 19 kind of quite not much surviving of them, kind of little structures in the site. When we excavated them, we knew that there were some stones with visible decoration on them, and that's these ones shown on the right. And all of that decoration formed a particular form on the edge of the stone, facing inwards to the building, and appeared to have sequences of repeated decoration on them. But when we excavated to build this small bit of walling, we realised that a lot of the stones had hidden decoration as well. And whilst you might expect that any building would reuse a lot of stone from earlier structures, for example, the differential nature of the hidden parts on these stones kind of suggests something else. Because with the stones with the hidden art, it was tended to be singular motifs, so the act of a single event of inscription, if you like. And even more than that, it appeared to be made on the uppermost surface of the stone, but after at least one stone had been placed on top. And that's what's shown in the shaded bit here. So you can see that the carving has been made on the space available that doesn't have a stone on top. And for me, this suggested that actually with some of these carvings at least, they were carving as they were building. Perhaps as a form of ownership, mason's marks perhaps, or perhaps part of an ongoing conversation with a team of builders, or perhaps kind of secret messages to bestow kind of protection on the building. We don't know, but it's certainly an insight into the way that these marks are sometimes made as part of the practice of construction itself. When we came to excavate structure 11, we had the opportunity to test this theory. And sure enough, the stones with the visible decoration, it was all on the outer face, all these repeated kind of sequences of attention, and the stones with the hidden decoration were like this, singular motifs on the uppermost surface of the stone. And again, so something quite interesting happening there. So I've often been quite fascinated by these hidden stones and what they kind of might suggest to us about what's going on site. And certainly that's hopefully going to be more of a focus as I do more work. Here we go. But it's also a bit of a cautionary tale, because this wall, for example, which is the inner face of it's the inside robbed out face of one of the inner walls of structure 8. It's quite hard to explain with the double skinned walls, and it's the kind of, yes, it's the outer face of the kind of inner skin, if you like. That's structure 8 behind where all those people are. And it had 2 very nice hidden stones in it. But whereas the lovely one on the right appears to have been broken, but then incorporated into the heart of the structure anyway, when it was being built, the one on the left, the carving appears to have only been made once that whole stretch of walling was actually exposed during robbing, much, much later, hundreds of years later, in fact. So we have this kind of strange situation where these stones are the same context number, they belong to the same wall, so I guess kind of they're on paper they're the same phase, yet they were probably decorated hundreds of years apart. And this is kind of the sort of complications we, kind of pick apart in archaeology that actually make it quite interesting, even if it's a bit of a challenge. But again, being at the Ness allows us to have those sort of conversations and pick apart this data in a way that no other site can do, because it just simply doesn't have the same level of chronological and stratigraphic information that we have at the Ness. Okay, I need to whiz on a bit, don't I? So anyway, questions about the site. Some of the biggest questions about all of these carvings are around style. What does it mean to have kind of cross and lozenges, or just lozenges, or triangles, or these banded decorations? What do they mean? How can we interpret them? And it's certainly a challenge. And picking apart kind of what these different motifs might mean across the site, do they relate to certain buildings and things, is really interesting. Now, one thing I've found is that there seems to be a concentration of certain types of marks in certain areas of the site, but not necessarily to specific buildings. So, for example, structure 8 has a lot of banded decoration, and so does structure 17 and 18, which underlie it. And that suggests, of course, that perhaps that there's a lot of reuse of material from those earlier structures being used in structure 8. But it's also quite curious that that reuse doesn't expand out to other buildings so much. It seems to be fairly contained. So there's something interesting going on there. And this is something that requires a lot more picking apart than me just saying that anecdotally. But yes, questions of style. What do they mean? And just another close-up there of that wonderful stone from structure 10 with its fantastic triangles. Now, one of the most exciting things about the stage of post-excavation that we're moving in now has been the incredible work that the triage team, the pot people have been doing on all the ceramics in the site. And I haven't got a more up-to-date picture to explain that, but they've been doing fantastic work on this really complicated assemblage of pottery. For me, I'm really interested to see how the designs on the grooved ware pottery, the different motifs, might relate to the different motifs we find in the stone. Are there a kind of identity, motifs that relate to different structures, or are they found across the sites? You know, how do these things relate to one another? And how can we think about these different motifs? This is some of the banded decoration shown on this picture. And again, from really large stones to really quite small ones, and including this one here, which is that one I showed you, the right-hand one, which was hidden in the wall of structure 8, and also known as Georgie's stone. And Ola will be very familiar with this because this ended up being the inspiration for a lovely range of jewellery as well. And so these wonderful banded patterns are really quite intriguing to me. And of course, they relate right back to the Brodgar stone. And also they have parallels in sites like Maze Howe as well. So this is really fascinating to kind of think about these and to pick them apart. So is there a meaning to different motifs? We simply don't know. And actually, it's almost impossible to work that out. I get contacted regularly, normally by retired engineers and mathematicians who think they've figured it out. And but quite simply, I don't think these designs can be necessarily read like a language. They don't necessarily fit all the kind of markers for different languages that we have. And that's even with putting it through various bits of software. And of course, there's been lots of great developments with lots of early languages quite recently. But the other thing that speaks about them not being a language as such is that many of the stones from the site have not just one motif carved on them, but layers and layers and layers and layers on top of one another. And that means that if there is a kind of meaning residing in a particular motif, then that meaning doesn't stay static for long. It can be defaced, augmented, changed, altered. So that meaning must be able to be fluid and changeable. So, and my example for that is this quite wonderful stone. You can just see how much is going on here. We've got kind of these finely incised lines, there's cut marks, there's deeply carved motifs, and more besides going on there. And I like to kind of think about what's going on with this stone. Did one person carve one bit, then pass it to somebody next to them? Or was there actually maybe weeks, months, years that went by between those different acts of inscription and carving and looking at the stone? We don't know. Again, it's one of those challenges, is trying to unpick duration and time in archaeology. Even with the Brodgar stone, there are similar sequences of attention because there's not just the carvings on the edge of the stone's face there, but there's also these cut marks, these pet designs as well, which are very deliberate. And you can see even on that left-hand band there, it's almost like there's a space within there for that cut mark. It's very deliberate. For years, that was just dismissed as damage and not including any illustrations or anything, but it's very much a deliberate part of marking the stone. And that opens up all these thinkings to think about process and material. So we can, that's your hands, Chris, actually, I think, yeah. So it's Chris doing his wonderful kind of reconstruction work there, carving on the edge of the stone. So, because if we move away from thinking about motifs having meaning, we can open up to think about working processes and things as well. And it opens up the bigger picture to thinking about materials and how people choose them, how they work them, and all these different kind of conversations around stone. And there is certainly I mean, the people who worked the stone at the Ness really knew what they were doing. They knew where to get the best stone. They knew where to quarry it. They knew the best kind of size pieces to have it in, to work with it. They knew how to dress it and carve it to bring out the best of its qualities, and then how to place it in positions for the biggest impact, whether that impact was visible or not. Okay. So, challenges perhaps. Lots of challenges to do with chronology and context, but also that's the strength of the site of the Ness of Brodgar. That's the kind of richness of what we have. But it's a very complicated assemblage, not least because these are artifacts as well as architecture, so they need to be kind of treated in a slightly different way than other types of find on the site. But what we need when we're thinking about these decorative pieces is a kind of multi-layered approach. It's not enough to just look at motifs or materials or types of working or context. We have to look at all of those things together and how they interact with one another. So what we need to do is kind of zoom in, and I like this stone. It's not a very high resolution picture, but you can see it's can you see that circular kind of bit there where my things, it's like somebody's been really frustrated and just gone like that. Like, I don't know, maybe you've never done that with a biro, but I know I have. And so we need to zoom in to the kind of sort of real microstratigraphy of the stone surfaces and think about them and try and unpick those different layers of carving. And to do that, kind of make use of a lot of different recording techniques that we're able to do nowadays. And maybe we could identify particular tools or even individual carvers, which would be quite amazing, wouldn't it? But we also, at the same time, need to zoom out and think about the bigger picture, how the Ness of Brodgar relates to other sites in Orkney and also beyond Orkney as well, and think about that wider geographical context. And also the wider geological context as well, thinking about not only where the materials for the decorated stone comes from, but also how it might reference the landscape as well, and how those interactions happen. This particular stone here has got what looks at first sight to be a carved opposed triangle or saltire motif on it. It's actually natural, that kind of cross fissure in it. It's placed in the entranceway of as a door jamb in one of the annex walls of structure 10. It's been placed in exactly the same sort of position that we'd expect a carved stone to be placed in. So perhaps there was no distinction between something being geological or human-made, so there's bigger questions there. And we see that in other sites as well. This is a close-up of a stone found at Scarabray in the 1973 excavations. And just look at those lozenges. I mean, it's just incredible. And, anyone who's walked on the shore in Orkney will be very familiar with those shapes, because that's exactly the sort of shapes we find in the bedrock in Orkney. And I'm not saying it's directly representational, but for people who carved stone, who quarried stone, who walked on bedrock, there's a kind of immersive perception. These shapes, these types of working and the breaking of stone would have been part of their world. So it's perhaps no surprise that we see these patterns. Sorry, I'm going to get a wriggle on. I realise I'm holding everyone back from the raffle as well. And this is, I was saying to Nick just as we came in, that it's a real challenge with the Ness to kind of get not so many slides, because it's very easy to have 300 slides of amazing stones because there's so many things to look at. So I had to boil it down to my top 5 favourite stones, something like that. But this is one of them. And just saying about those patterns we see on the shore, those kind of natural fracture lines, those lozenges that we see so much in Orkney. And if you can see, they're just on this stone as well. And this is absolutely one of my favourite, maybe even top 3 stones from the site. Um, and this was found, it's one of those lovely rounded hearts that we all like to pick up on the beach. And certainly when Stacey, who found it, picked it up in his hand, that's not his hand, by the way, it's Dan's hand, but when Stacey found it, it didn't look like anything but a very nice beach pebble, which still, by the way, wouldn't have belonged at the nest, still would have been brought there, even if it wasn't decorated. But as he turned it in his hand, the light hit it and it illuminated. And I don't know how visible they are on the screen there, but it's absolutely covered in this incredibly fine lattice patterns of intersecting lozenges, just like you see on that stone for Scarabray, just like you see on the bedrock on the shore in Orkney. And so it's almost like a little pocket bit of the landscape that you could carry around. So there's questions of scale here, from the geological, from the vast, to the archaeological, to the site, to the building, to the artifact, to something you can perhaps hold in your hand. So big questions and how they all fit together. And I don't know all the answers, but it's fun trying to find them out. So very much in the post-excavation stage now, trying to deal with all these huge numbers of stones. And there really are lots and lots and lots of them. Oh, look, the old shed. Oh, so there's a nice shiny new shed now. See. Lots of challenges as we go forward with kind of post-ex stage. Quite a few stones had to be left in situ in 2024 because they were simply at the bottom of huge walls. We couldn't, could not extricate them, and they survive only in record. There are huge numbers of records. I personally have thousands of photographs of the stones. There are lots of other people have thousands of photographs as well. There are drawings, there are plans, there are all these huge amounts of material that needs to be brought together. Because the stones are often part of architectural features like walls, they often were first identified in, say, 2007, and then it was only in 2024 or something that we kind of finally removed them because of the nature of them. So often they have multiple small find numbers from different excavation years. So this is all a kind of, this kind of admin task of like spreadsheets and numbers flying all over the place that we have to do as well. And of course, so much knowledge is kind of about the site and about how it all fits together has kind of changed as well since 2006. So contexts have changed, structure numbers have changed. What we might have thought was kind of structure 8 has become structure 17 or something like that. This happens all over the sites. It's part of the process of excavation and finding things out. But it means that there's a lot of records that need to be kind of tallied up. So a huge amount of work there. And a practical consideration, a lot of the stones are really heavy and really awkward, and it's quite a lot of work to do them. But yes, the end of an era. And but as Jeannie's sign said in her window, the work continues. And I'm just about wrapping up. So what I started this talk with 2006, and I was kind of there when the first stone was found, although I didn't really appreciate the significance of it, to be honest, at the time, only with hindsight. And I was also lucky enough to be there when the final decorated stone came out on the site in 2024. And I think the look on my face says it all, because it was quite a crazy moment, and with Time Team filming, and there were huge numbers of people because it was the kind of final throes of the excavation, but lots of excitement. And so lots of work, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it all when I can kind of finally find the time, maybe. But on that note, saying about Time Team and the final hours, all I've got to do now is put in a plug for what's happening next. And that's lots of excitement because there's the premiere of the film next week after, 2 weeks' time. What's that? Week on Friday, week next Friday. 2 weeks tomorrow. Yeah, sorry. And so lots of excitement. And then even better, there's going to be digging on site as well. So lots and lots and lots to look forward to. And I think finally, I'm glad to know that's me. So thank you.
What a treat. What a treat. Thank you so much for that. I think it's absolutely amazing to get an insight into the post-excavation process. The thrill of finding things is great. The thrill of publishing them is great, but it's the meanderings that go from one to the other that are really the highlights. And it's very good to see part of that process. It's often the area that people forget about, and it's the area which costs money, by the way, just saying. Post-excavation is not necessarily very sexy, but it costs, and it's really good to raise funds for that. So, good luck with that, all the Ness project here, and good luck with the forthcoming things that we can see. Now, there are no doubt several questions. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask for if you could just raise your hand if you have a question, and then our glamorous assistant here will rush around with the microphone so that everybody can hear what is being asked. So do we have any takers for questions? I don't believe that, so think again. Right. So, yes, there's a lady at the front here.
Thank you very much, Antonia. This may be a dumb question, but did you find anything that sort of looked like a person or a cow or anything that or fish or any sort of recognizable shapes like that?
Oh, thanks, Alex. That's actually a really interesting question because we often talk about there not being much or hardly any representational art in the Neolithic. But one way of thinking about it is it's maybe not representational in the way we're tuned to thinking, and that perhaps it is. But of course, there is, as I said, that kind of link with perhaps natural features. There are carvings in the rounds. There are figurines, including Buddha. Oh, I nearly wore my Buddha earrings actually, but they're including Buddha. You go to Stromness Museum and see whalebone carving. There are examples of figurative art from the Neolithic. And there are, of course, in the Homo Papi South tomb, there are that kind of what look like eyes and eyebrows, which are very similar to the Westry Wifey's eyes and eyebrows. And the horn spirals that we get at the Ness are very much, they're called horn spirals because they're like the horns on a ram. They're kind of, they could very much have a kind of animal link as well. So I wonder whether there is representational art, but we're not maybe always recognizing it. But it is an interesting question because it has been debated whether there was a taboo, a bit like a kind of, a taboo against living sort of things, which is possible as well.
Thank you very much.
There was another hand in this area over here. Yes. Next time. Can I just say, just before we're waiting for Katie to start, that the publication of your thesis is a definite must read. I've read a lot of theses in my time, and they're not usually very readable, but this is a great one.
Well, it's 10 years ago, so like I say, I would probably change quite a lot of it, but and there's been lots better things written by other people since then, but it's open access, so you can just download the PDF and decide yourselves.
It's readable, that's the point. It's very readable. Katie, sorry.
We used a bit of your PhD at the Yak visit at Mazehow, and we had a printout and we were going around finding all the carvings. I wanted to know about, how you were talking about structure 8, in the rubble, that one of the carvings was made during the kind of robbing of it. How do you know that, or what makes you think that?
Or after. So it was the bit it was facing out from related actually to structure 7 and 19 and formed because that wall had gone. So we know from the deposit it's up against that bit of robbed out wall where it would have been, and it faced a stone that was a pillar that also had drilled marks in it. And so maybe a bit of conjecture there, but kind of absolutely seemed to relate to a space that had been made when that wall had been robbed out, as against that really beautiful stone with the deep carvings on the edge, which quite clearly had been broken, probably devastatingly broken actually, because it was so beautiful, but it was incorporated into the wall, and that was very definitely incorporated into the wall when it was built. So there is a different thing going on there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Have anybody? Yes, sir, one at the front.
Thanks. I was just wondering, in terms of the patterning that you have within the stones themselves, obviously the nests spanned quite a long period of time. Do any of the patterns represent particular periods of time? And if they do, is there a continuity between them, or is, in your view, is there quite a continuity to it such that it's very difficult to understand where the patterns are coming from in that sense?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And a lot of sites have kind of, and certainly there's been a lot of work done on the Irish sites on this sort of chronology of different types of marking. There's a very clearly kind of sequence where the incised marks are the earliest, and then the kind of pick dressing comes later. And we might see that a bit at the Ness, but there's so much reuse of stone that it's really, there's a lot to unpick, because there are buildings on top of buildings on top of buildings, and the depth of stratigraphy and the amount of reuse is quite complicated. So that's certainly one thing to look at, is whether that style relates to chronology in that way. And I think it does to a certain extent. Certainly cut marks seem to be a bit later, and that would fit with a wider patterning. But I think, like everything at the Ness, it's not as straightforward or as simple as we might hope it to be, because it's just such an incredible site. It's a really complicated kind of story with all the material.
Do we have any further questions?
I'd like to ask.
Yes.
Thank you. You mentioned these couple of techniques, your rock picking and I think your rock drilling, I think you mentioned. Could you expand a little on the techniques that were used to make those grooves and the rock drilling, how that was
Yeah.
done?
So most of the designs on the site are incised or carved. They're made with flint, and so either you can. It's quite easy to carve the stone generally in Orkney. It's quite soft. You can carve it with flint, and you go more and more, and you'll get a nice deep carved line. The drilling can be done very easily with a stick, or even a lobster claw, or even a bit of flint as well, just simply rotating it, and that's quite easy to do. Yeah.
Thank you.
The pick dressing. So talking about direct percussion, so probably holding a hammerstone and hitting the face of the sandstone. So just having a harder hammerstone onto the soft red and yellow sandstone, and just doing that all over. So that's a kind of form of direct percussion with the hammerstone. Chiseling is you've got another tool in there as well. So normally a bit of flint and a hammerstone on the flint onto the stone. So there's different stages and different tools as well. And I should say, I don't want to put Chris on the spot, but he's an excellent stone carver and very good at reconstructing all of these techniques, so knows a huge amount about this.
Thank you.
One at the back.
You should
You do.
the one with the hand. Can you tell us where was that found and where is it now?
Well, I don't know where it is now. It's probably in somewhere. It's a treasure, so it's probably somewhere very safe. But I think that was actually one of the finds that was actually found not from a distinctive context within the buildings, because it is quite small, and also probably
We have time for one last one. Yes? You just wait for the mic. Thank you.
Yes, I'm just curious because you mentioned a few pieces of rock art from other places in Orkney. Is there anything similar from Barnhouse, being that it's so close by?
Yeah, there's one really big stone that's actually in Orkney Museum that has a really big stone, but a small area of it's got a really nice carving on it. But Barnhouse was sadly very plough truncated and did not have the same level of wall standing as at the Ness. I mean, we can imagine that it probably looks like the Ness, very, and certainly the outlines of the walls seem like that. But unfortunately, they didn't have the same level of survival preservation. But you can go to Orkney Museum and see a big stone from Barnhouse.
Any further comments? Right. Well, just wrapping it up. I think we've been very privileged to have a masterclass in artifact studies. I would say the process of artifact work is very detailed and really very significant. And I thank you for presenting your thoughts. And even though they will change as you work through it, it's really good to see the thought process. I'd also like to just briefly give a plug for your webpage and regular updates for the Ness, which most people in here will be aware of. But if you're not, just go and ferret around on the internet and you can see these regular updates with wonderful photographs. I would recommend that you have a look at that. So for now, I'd just like to say thank you very much to Antonia before we go for the raffle, but we'll thank you first. I think it's most important. So thank you.
Okay.